All right, Luce, you're all set?
Yeah, Scott, ready to go.
All right, perfect, perfect. So just like it says here, if your competitors are applying AI, they're going to peel away. Um, but applying AI in production is challenging, and that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, and walk you through, really some cost elements, some things that you can look to avoid, look to optimize, and hopefully operationalize some of your artificial intelligence data gathering and decision modeling. So, hi, I'm Scott King. I'm the chief marketer over here at Krista Software, and I'm joined by Luther Birdzill. Luther is our chief data scientist. Hey, Luther.
Hey, Scott.
So, what from your perspective, it says cost is the biggest obstacle to creating value with AI. Is that like how much of the biggest obstacle? Like by an enormous factor, a small factor? What do you think, Luther?
Scott, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to look at it, but my fundamental perspective when we look at this market, folks like Gartner and a bunch of other analysts have consistently surveyed that global return on investment in AI is like less than 2% on average. Um, through that lens, cost is the biggest problem, right? Followed very closely by time to value. So the companies that can figure out how to deliver AI to production and maintain it in production at significantly lower costs than their competitors are the ones that are pulling ahead and really redefining their markets.
All right, perfect. I'll take your word for it. That seems to be your expertise, but walk us through, just from a percentage wise, we're using 100 machine learning projects to make the math easy. So we're not using AI to calculate this. This is all manual, right? But walk us through, what happens if you take a broad brush and you say, okay, out of 100 machine learning projects, what happens? Like good, bad, ugly, what happens to all these projects?
So, so Scott, one of the first things we look at is, Gartner did this survey that says 85% of AI projects fail, and specifically, that's 85% of AI projects fail to deliver the value that rationalize the budgets to start them. So, you compare that to Project Management Institute survey that roughly half of software projects, traditional software projects that don't include AI, are failing. We're looking at like a 70% higher economic failure rate among AI and machine learning projects, and that's just way too high.
So the software projects that you quoted, 50%, is that SaaS projects? Is that custom software? Do you recall what kind of project that is?
My understanding that the last time I looked at that on it's the PMI, the Project Management Institute, is one of several who does that survey. That's a global statistic that includes both COTS, SaaS, custom, and so on. Now the reality is most of those projects do get to production. It's just about half of them are late and or over budget.
Okay, all right.
So on the AI side specifically, a lot of these fail. Some of these projects fail. Many of these projects fail because of data related issues. Others, are failing because of skill related issues where fundamentally the projects aren't staffed properly.
Does that count that you just can't find available talent, or is there a scarcity still with AI experts?
So, so with the experts, perhaps Scott, but there's no shortage of folks today, identifying themselves as data scientists, and quite frankly, there's a lot more competent data scientists in the marketplace than say there was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were still really struggling to make the machine learning, the fundamental technology work. Today, that's rarely the reason that we're seeing projects fail. The big obstacle is delivering this at, efficiently, both from a time and cost of a cost standpoint. And one of the big common things that I don't hear talked about enough is the executive responsibility to provide their teams to keep their teams focused on the right business objectives, and then B, to provide their teams with the resources that they need to be successful. So, there's times where companies who've been successful with their own custom software in the past say, hey, we're going to build our own AI, and they wind up, not staffing experts to do work that, really requires an expert to do. And they're coming in, they're spending maybe half or so of what they would, whether that's from an individual resource standpoint or trying to hire individuals to do the work that really requires a team to do. And ultimately, when things are like that, are understaffed and under budget, I personally have a difficult time rationalizing that, to blame the people. That's executive responsibility to provide their people with the resources that they need to be successful. And, all of which are ways that we're helping our customers at Krista succeed with AI.
Yeah, well, maybe people think that it's easier than it really is, right? So if they have a false expectation and they don't budget correctly, they don't allocate enough resources, because traditional software projects are much more successful than these that we're talking about.
Right. And, Scott, when a couple slides further in the conversation, we start to unpack some of the big cost areas of AI, and certainly some of them are, the data and the modeling, but there's a lot more to delivering as an AI project successfully to production and keeping it there. But not to jump ahead too much. So, among our, 85 failures out of 100, we covered, some are data, some are staffing, some are broader resources. And then a handful of them still fail because of operational processes, including the automated deployments. We've seen DevOps. I've experienced this in my career. We've actually helped build a company in this space in a past life. Just continue to have this huge return on investment in traditional software, especially when we can reuse those assets, right? So kind of like configure it once and then be able to leverage that across a lot of different projects. To the extent that ML is, experimental machine learning, right? We have many, many more iterations of it, hence typically many more deployments than we do of traditional software. Ergo, the value of automated deployments, or MLOps, is even higher in the AI space than it is on traditional software. Conversely, I see it, we see it missed a lot more, underinvested in relative to traditional software. So it's not AI powered. When the reality is it's even more important for AI.
Right. Okay, interesting. So here it says this is from from data to ROI, which is a Cognizant report. The average businesses have seen an ROI of just 1.3%. It's like how could that be? That seems really low.
Yeah, well, that's better than that number being negative. At least, we're for the billions and billions of dollars that are being invested in the technology, that we actually are creating some value now, at least on average. As folks move up from advanced to leader there, obviously that return on investment improves a little bit, but is still way below a threshold that is gonna sustain the high level of investment in this space, right? Folks need to be getting substantially higher returns than these small single digit to continue to rationalize making these big investments in this technology. And again, kind of going back to the fundamental thesis that AI by default costs too much. If you can figure out how to do this less expensive than your peers, then that directly translates into really augmenting, amplifying that return on the investment. Those are the companies then that continue to reinvest and double down, and hence they're really pulling away in their markets.
Yeah, perfect. So low ROI, and then it looks like the average payback time is quite a bit longer than traditional software projects, 17 months.
Yeah, and again here, so many of these projects, Scott, and I've been guilty of this in past lives too. In my first AI startup, where we really planned the project, there was so much to get done just to get the data ready for modeling, and then train a model that was accurate enough that it could really contribute some meaningful insights, to help a business become more predictable. The reality is, in some ways, that's only the starting line. And we'll the next couple slides unpack roughly the other 4 or 5 things, depending on how we're counting, that are required to really deliver value. So when those are missed up front, these projects wind up feeling very over budget and just wind up taking a lot longer. So if we look at this business impact matrix, nobody deliberately makes a big investment in complex technology that's going to have a small impact on their business. It happens, but generally not done on purpose. In the upper right, if we look at custom AI projects, if we're doing something novel for the first time, we're going to have to staff a team of data engineers and data scientists to kind of figure those parts out. And then, there's no free lunch specifically around the data prep and the modeling, but there's a lot of other areas where we can still compress cost and timeline on a custom project, but where the real value amplification and the real, return on investment amplification happens is when we can start reusing assets. And this goes beyond just code reuse. It really, there's application of this kind of comprehensively across the whole AI development deployment lifecycle. That there are a lot of analogs with, quite frankly, with traditional software, but for a variety of reasons, we're still not seeing the emphasis on reuse with AI assets that we do with traditional software, especially that half of traditional software which is consistently delivering value at scale.
Yeah, theoretically, I guess the Cognizant report, I don't recall if they calculated the ROI based on reuse. So maybe if some of those projects could be reused, maybe the returns could be a little bit greater since you're leveraging all that work. So still tough, right?
Still tough, but Scott, I think reuse is the holy grail of creating value with technology at scale, and it's obviously it's a huge focus for us at Krista. So the areas we focus, we're not trying to amplify these poor investments. We're helping our customers avoid those kind of wrong use cases, and not just from a technology standpoint, but the impact on the business specifically of this technology. So if we have the potential to make really high business impact, transformational level impact, custom AI solutions can be great. And, we love helping our customers with that. Similarly, and where, I think Krista really shines and is especially differentiated is the extent to which, it's baked into her DNA, from Krista's conception that to facilitate the reuse of these AI assets, really streamlines these projects, reduces the staffing complexity, as well as all the infrastructure costs and other costs associated with this. And we've helped some companies achieve some great results there, Scott.
Yeah, you need to get the flywheel going, right, with the reuse and everything. So
yeah.
So I know we've got some high level buckets of costs here across the cost of delivering AI. And then, walk us through, you talked about the custom AI and then, the holy grail of reusing that custom AI. And then we also have Ask Krista. So walk us through what the differences is. And then I think we're going to go into each one of these in a little bit more detail.
Yep, so, sounds great, Scott. So we've broken the cost down to 7 high level areas. And if we look at the typical AI project, like you're going to need some hardware to train the models on. There's going to be a substantial investment in preparing the data for modeling. You need to hire a team or, a data scientist or a team of data scientists, which is usually the biggest cost. You've then got to deploy this stuff to production and deploy this to all the different environments where it's developed, tests, and then eventually production. And there's enough of those deployments that usually investing in automation there is really important. And then, really machine learning model, Scott, takes inputs and returns an output. So like fundamentally, there's so much marketing hype around this, it's easy to get distracted. But fundamentally, a machine learning model is a small piece of software. And that piece of software has very little value, in most cases no value, until it's integrated with other AI, with the systems, and then especially with the people. And then ideally in a way that understands the people who are going to be using it. So that integration piece is big, and we just see it all the time. I've been working on RFP last week that was really about data prep, data science. Really wasn't focused. And of course, success criteria is, enable our people to make better decisions, but wasn't focused on the automated deployments, wasn't focused on the integration, wasn't focused on security. And there's actually two sides of security. There's the kind of the role-based security, right? Only the right people have access to the right data, the right models at the right time. But to the extent that there's even more moving parts in an AI-enabled software than there is traditional software, Scott, helping the security analysts, who are getting flooded with all kinds of security alerts from all their various systems, helping them kind of filter through the noise there and focus on the really high priority issues is also something that Krista does. In fact, she uses AI to help with that. But that's a big piece, of underestimated cost. And then lastly, Scott, the validation, right? Validation is less important, say, for a company like Google, who's searching the internet 3.5 billion times a day, recommending numerous advertisements on every one of those searches. That's characteristic. And Amazon, Netflix, LinkedIn, others of that ilk have these businesses that are very fault tolerant. They can be wrong. Their AI can be wrong a lot, and because of their volumes, they're still able to generate huge revenues. So that's not characteristic of normal businesses. And with normal businesses that can't be wrong a lot, that human in the loop validation is absolutely critical. So, when you kind of start adding all those things up to the right of the data science piece on our typical AI project, it's no wonder there's only this little sliver left for the return on investment.
Yeah.
When we're doing custom AI with Krista, on that next row down, there's some investment in the Krista software. Indeed, that's that blue piece. But by compressing really all those other costs, except, for argument's sake here, we're saying except the data science, if you're going to train custom models, that's a fixed cost. Even just reusing those other assets really amplifies the return on investment of a custom project. And then when you can start reusing those custom projects with a nothing like code experience to integrate with other people, other systems, other AI, that's really where the huge returns, both time to market is dramatically compressed as well as cost, both of which are extremely meaningful in this real fast moving space.
Okay. Well, good. Let's go into each one of these really quickly. And then no offense taken on the marketing hype earlier that you were talking about. Maybe guilty of that from time to time.
Contributing to that too. I think we all of us who talk about this are at some level.
You said earlier about the RFP that you were looking at last week, and we talked about this offline. So this is not something that we just talked about for all the viewers. But talk to me about how much of the data prep work was listed in that RFP versus kind of what do you do next, right? Kind of the operations of ML.
Sure. So Scott, this was a very data savvy company. They have traditional tools, traditional databases today, but the details in this RFP about exactly what data was coming from what systems, it was really well thought out, really well understood, both at a strategic level as well as an execution one. There wasn't trivial cost or time associated with it. They had to have IT teams pull data from various different systems, then have data engineers working with subject matter experts to identify some of the outliers, get that data cleaned up, garbage in, garbage out. Really old adage in software, of course, applies even more to AI projects than it does to traditional software. And then in this this data prep piece is really spot on, right? Like Krista, because she can connect to a lot of individual systems with a nothing like code experience, essentially makes a lot of that data gathering, data consolidation, data access available to end users through a nothing like code experience, which can really compress time and cost, right, relative to having to make that an IT project. So anyway, that was captured and very resonant with that customer. Of course, when we're using entire pipelines with Ask Krista, that cost gets compressed even further, again, which is where that huge value amplification is. But yeah, that RFP Krista, instead of having folks manually connecting to the systems, having Krista basically do it for them, did create a very representative, the slide's very representative of the kind of value that we were able to create for them with a custom project. And then I guess maybe flip to the next slide. The project also noted that kind of after they'd gotten all this data together, that data scientists were going to have to do something with it. And that was kind of it was not nearly as detailed in this RFP. But customers certainly aware that this data prep piece, and they knew all the ends and outs of that this was basically going to have to go into some kind of box, and someone with a data science title or a team with a data science, a group of data scientists, were going to do something to that data to enable their business to become more predictive. So that's also representative here, or represented here, that custom AI project with Krista. Data scientists training models is fixed cost. What Krista's doing is compressing the other costs around it and shortening that path to creating reusable assets.
Yeah, I think the short answer here is, if you are a data scientist working on a custom project, the costs are relatively the same, right, for doing your work and building the model, training the model, but the operations, right, really enhance the ROI here, right?
Yeah, Scott, and that's a really great point, because with these kind of statistics about return on investment, and so many of these projects failing and so few models getting to production, really the leading question increasingly for data science interviews is, what systems have you worked on, what's failed, and what has actually got to production, and what kind of business impact did it have? So there's this increasing incentive alignment, down even to kind of the lower technical levels here, to work on projects that are successful. And if a data scientist is developing a great Python notebook that is handed off to an organization that doesn't know what to do with it, that's not only a loss for that organization, but it's also a loss for that data scientist, and an area that we're extremely focused on at Krista, obviously, including the MLOps. And this was, the first, I'd say, really conspicuous area that the RFP, we know the customer ultimately wants this, they just don't know they need to want it yet, or don't know how to ask for it yet. And this is essentially the automated deployment of all of these assets, the right data, the right models, and the right software to the right place at the right time, which is obviously more complex than just deploying the right software to the right place at the right time. But again, to the extent that when we're doing traditional software and programmers, engineers are explicitly telling the computer what to do, there are generally many fewer deployments of that style of coding than there are when we're experimenting with, okay, here's a certain configuration of the data, here's a certain configuration of these algorithms, how accurate a model do I get? How well behaved is that model? And then reconfiguring things and experimenting again. The inherent experimental nature of machine learning generally requires that there's going to be many, many more deployments into a more complex environment. Hence, the automation is critical. And there's a huge win here on every single model that gets deployed, if that automated deployment or MLOps infrastructure can be reused, as opposed to kind of the default today is almost created from scratch on every project. Which just inhales resources, time, and capital that directly impact these or translate into these lower returns on investment in the technology.
Yeah, that would be tough, right? Because these projects take a long time, and if they don't deploy, then hopefully someone's paying attention, right? Like, hey, we should not invest in this, or hey, we're doing this incorrectly. We did have a question on. I guess this goes back to the companies that were successful, that did see an ROI on some of these deployments. Any stories off the top of your head that companies that were deploying this did so successfully, like those achieving the 1, 2, 3, 4% ROIs?
Yeah. So the companies that I've seen, Scott, and had an opportunity to participate in the process with, that are getting substantial ROIs, like full project payback in less than 12 months. And, in some cases, even less than 6 months, right, as compared to the 17, are then generating double-digit returns on investment within those same timeframes, within similar timeframes. Those companies, really had their act together with data. It wasn't just like kind of a blind, like, hey, these are our systems, here's some diagrams of them, let's go start this, big long process of digging through all this manually. They were more thoughtful about how they connected to the systems, accessed the data, and then paired data scientists with their subject matter experts to really evaluate the quality of that data. And actually, backing up a step even further, Scott, and excuse me, I was remiss to not mention this first. The number one criteria of the companies that are succeeding to generate positive return on double-digit return on investment with AI is focus on a business outcome. They start the project focused on a business outcome, and you typically, through their executive leadership, they never lose focus on it. It's the main objective through the entire thing. And I've seen the same thing in my career in software. 25 years ago, when I started doing this, we were less focused on business outcomes. And through my career, especially in some of the downturns that we've weathered, when folks get really, really focused on business outcomes, the projects tend to have better business outcomes. Figure, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll stop there, kind of at that high level. But there are implications, on achieving these ROIs, in addition to the focus on the business outcome, really across all seven of these areas that we've broken down.
Okay, and I'll send a case study out to the gentleman that asked that question on some high value AI projects, but this kind of takes, this Forrester quote kind of talks the similar about what you're talking about. The goal is the business value, right? So, but if you take a look at the business value and you take a people first approach, which is, we all work at these companies and we have systems to support us, sometimes it's as easy as that. Just make it simpler to use.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to perform, right? It's got to be able to do something that the software, the other tools, the alternatives you have can't, right? So there has to be some meaningful insight, some information that you can't access any other way. But then, right, it's got to be delivered in a time and cost-effective way, and ultimately one that people want to use. If we've learned anything over the past several decades in software, is that no matter how much management tries to force things down people's throat, if people don't want to use the stuff, they're not going to, and the businesses aren't going to get value from it. So simplifying technology, right, which is probably the biggest obstacle to adoption, is absolutely instrumental at being successful with this. And I think Forrester is spot on about that.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like we need to make technology that understands people.
That'd be a good start.
So, here it says Krista builds trust in AI, and this is your human in the loop example, right? So what is building trust in AI mean?
So for the massive volumes of low consequence, or trivial decisions, that this doesn't really apply. But again, there's very, very few businesses that have meaningful use cases like that. For most use cases, for most businesses, the users, the decision makers, are not going to don't trust the AI by default. So the adoption process that we found that's most successful is to start by enabling the AI to make suggestions to the decision makers through the same interfaces that they're using today. And if you're using software like Krista, that's seamless. If you're using custom software, this is an area where the cost can really get quite out of control quite quickly. But having a nothing like code experience to add the suggestive AI initially, and then followed by a nothing like code experience to enable that AI to run autonomously when the decision makers are ready to. So kind of like confirm, or suggest, then confirm, and at some point when the users are like, okay, I'm done checking the confirm box, like this thing really works, I trust it, then they switch it to full auto. And that's been a very effective path. But that by default, Scott, again, that's all custom software that most projects are not thinking of when they start. So when they're like, oh my God, we need humans in the loop to validate this, after they've already spent all this time and money building models and integrating and securing these models, developing their own way to automate deployments of these models. And then it's like, oh, well, now we need to build custom software to enable our people to start interacting with them. It's right, that all just destroys the return on investment. Flip side of that, when you have that as platform capability with an out-of-the-box solution, that directly translates to amplified ROI even on your first project.
Yeah, that would. No one wants to turn their life over to a beginner, right? So you gotta you gotta learn. So ask Krista. So we had on the charts, we had the custom AI, and then we did have ask Krista. Tell us a little bit about what that is, and maybe some use cases, right? Because these are the simple ones that you can immediately deploy, because you've almost eliminated the data prep and data science work, right? You just kind of hook this up and go.
Yeah, so Ask Krista, Scott, is fundamentally about reusing pipelines, which do both the data preparation, the model training, and then some of the validation. So when we've solved problems, or we started this with some basic regressors, predicted number, and some basic classifiers, which are, tell me what kind of thing the input is, based on training that on an appropriate data set. And we've done that for a handful of things. We then added anomaly detection, and that started as a use case from a customer. It was an invoice processing scenario, and from time to time they were sending these invoices to accounts payable that were really way overcharged. They had line items on there, maybe a decimal was in the wrong place or something like that. So we initially did that as a custom project, but then very quickly, really on the before we even started the second project, the second phase of that project, we had added that anomaly detection to Ask Krista. So streamlining and facilitating the reuse of multiple assets associated with delivering this technology to production, to your point, reduced the hardware, it reduced the data prep, it reduced the modeling cost, it reduced, specifically by requiring less data science staffing, reduced the validation, and then already had it aligned with that human in the loop, validation and integration piece. So, just a huge amplification on the return investment from just the first iteration to the second iteration of that project. And of course, many, many more things in the pipeline and coming down the pike with Ask Krista, quite frankly, including a lot of our cognitive issue resolution use cases, in which Krista will read things like inbound emails and inbound alerts, understand enough of them to be able to create tickets in the associated systems, and remove a fundamental bottleneck, which I believe exists in virtually every business out there, which is the pace at which we humans read. Right? We talk about accelerating the value creation by accelerating from human speed to machine speed. Well, literacy has a profound impact there. And we've got some really exciting things that we're rolling out around just right off the shelf computer literacy for streamlining those kind of processes in the second half of this year, Scott.
Okay, nice. I'd like to be able to read faster and understand it, right? I can read faster, but I have no idea what I read. Machine doesn't have that same problem. But in terms of, how long this takes, we talked about the 17 months payback period. What we're talking about, specifically with Ask Krista, is nowhere near that, but then changes. It says here 15 minutes. Is that feasible?
Scott, months to minutes is our goal. And full disclosure, we are not compressing a custom AI project that would say take 6 months into minutes yet. Maybe it's 6 months to 3, which is still, huge win, especially as far as the return on investment is concerned. But these reusable Ask Krista capabilities, to the extent that we're delivering them through this nothing like code experience that's already connected to the underlying data, take me to task, folks who are watching this webinar. This is going to sound too good to be true, and really the only way that, or the most efficient way for us to dispel that is just to let us show it to you. But yeah, we're really taking some projects that started off as months the first time they were done, kind of the old way, create everything oneself, and are compressing some of those use cases, Scott, truly into minutes.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks, Luther, for talking with us today. If anybody has any further questions, you can email me or Luther. So we're Luther at kristasoft.com. I'm Scott at kristasoft.com. Love to hear from you. If you'd like to see a custom demonstration, please let us know, and we'll kind of guide it to, per your requirements and kind of per your user story. We'd be glad to do that. Luther, anything you want to close with?
No, Scott, thanks so much for the opportunity to to share these thoughts with you, the group, and the world here. And I guess I guess I'm done unless we have any other questions.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.